When people look back on 9/11, and sometimes they refer to it as a tragedy or a tragic event, and I think we want to be careful with our words. And actually, I think we should look at it as, or remember it as, a moral evil, or what some would call an infamous event, because a tragedy refers to a different set of circumstances. If a hurricane hits, a plane accidentally hits a building, that might be tragic, but this was a moral evil, I think we should say. And the remembrance of the event is a delicate thing. The Bible actually talks about a lot of practices that inform us about remembering. The Jews have the Passover meal to remember the Exodus, Christians, the Lord's Supper, that help influence our thinking, our moral formation, our spiritual formation. So I think it is important to remember, and we can apply that to civil events or events that happen in our nation or in our locale. And so it's really a spiritual discipline, a practice that we should engage in. And it reveals a couple things, just real quick. It reveals how tragically flawed humanity is, but it can also reveal how amazingly courageous sometimes we can be. And I guess it's no revelation or shock that people do terrible things, or at least it shouldn't be. But what really gets me to be in awe is when people do such good and courageous things, like the first responders and the people who helped and supported during that day. So that points us to a God who can do incredibly good things and actually make good people in light of the tragically flawed humanity that we are.
You know, when I think about the anniversary of 9/11, of course, I remember waking up that Tuesday morning. I'll never forget the events that I saw. But there's a couple things that enter my mind as I think about the anniversary. One of them is that ideas have real consequences. I mean, when you think about what happened on 9/11, Al-Qaeda, they viewed America in certain terms. They're kind of fond of saying that America was the great Satan, and therefore they made their attack, crashing jumbo jets into these huge buildings. I also think, though, that we see in America's response, I mean, there's been a very long period where America has gone forth in its war against terror. And we're seeing that just even recently with things happening in Afghanistan. And so ideas have consequences. And it's important to understand what people think and why they believe what they do. Another element of 9/11 that I feel very strongly about is I saw a unity in America that I had not seen in a long time. People on the left, people on the right, people rich, poor, people came out and they saw the great devastating events. And we were no longer Democrats and Republicans. We were no longer left and right. We were all Americans. And I think of the responders. I think of the policemen. I think of the firemen. I think of people who worked tirelessly for so long, who even suffered, damage to their lungs because they were pulling people out of these devastating buildings. And so I felt proud to be an American. And when I think about 9/11, it hurts, but I also think about the many good things that we have in our world today.
One of the things that I remember about 9/11 was the aftermath and the fact that suddenly church attendance really rose significantly. And I think part of that was because people were really looking for answers. How do you make sense of what seems to be such a senseless event? But also, I think people really wanted a sense of hope that if anything, the 9/11 event really showed just how ephemeral life is, how temporary life is and uncertain. And people wanted some kind of hope. And this is why I think it's so important as Christians to be able to really articulate reasons why we believe that Christianity is true, not just simply recounting our experiences as Christians, though our experiences of God are very important, but to also be able to show to people why really Christianity is true and that the hope that we derive from our faith actually has factual foundation. So that's something that I think is important to remember going forward, is that while 9/11 really highlighted the fact of that everyone has this need for hope, to keep in mind that that need for hope is always underneath the surface on every person. And if we can tap into that need and show them the hope that we have through Christ, that our ability to engage people with the Christian faith will be far more effective.
I can think of nothing better than John 16:33. In this world you'll have tribulation, but take heart, I've overcome the world. It's crucial we be living in a universe with thermodynamics and other things that cause tribulation in order for Christ to eradicate evil once and for all. But what I love about that verse, we actually get a little foretaste of how we can take heart. I had two relatives, for example, who worked in the towers. One of them was sick and didn't come in that day. The other one happened to be in a business trip in Florida. And then I think of our friend, Kevin Wesley. He's an Air Force captain. He happened to be on vacation that very day in South Manhattan. And he knew immediately what was going on when he saw that plane come in. He knew it wasn't an accident. And he immediately went into action, and he saved a lot of people that day from death and injury.
I just remember very vividly the day of 9/11 in 2001. I was at work. A colleague of mine sent an email to watch what was going on in the news. So I walked over to the student union and just watched in awe and was just dumbfounded and stupefied at some level of the evil being perpetrated that day. I remember calling my wife and telling her to turn the TV on, but to make sure that the kids weren't watching, because I didn't want them to bear the weight of an evil they weren't ready and prepared to deal with yet. But I think about what happened afterwards. I mean, you've got burning buildings, imminent in collapse, and yet there are people rushing into those buildings to protect and pull people out, to save people, because there's this intuitive recognition that everybody is important, every life matters. And so the first responders that went in and dealt that, also just the resolve of our country, that we recognize this was an evil act and it needed to be we needed to have an appropriate response. And there was a unity about the country in dealing with that ideas matter, and we wanted to fight for a country where what was good and right and true was what prevailed. And I guess just the wisdom and what I would want to encourage is to recognize that we live in a world. God has created this world, and part of the way we have in this world is we have a choice of, are we going to choose good or are we going to choose evil? And though people on that day chose evil, there was a far greater number of people who chose good. And I want to be a part of a society, part of a culture, part of a world that chooses good, follows God, because that's ultimately why we're important, is because God created us, has value on us, and that's good. So let's choose a world where we value people, where we want what's good, and we fight against the evil. We don't justify it. We don't say, well, that's just their perspective. We recognize what's evil. We fight for what's good and pass on a better society to our children than we inherited.